So most of my life, I felt like I really had everything together. I've been successful in my career. When I was young, I was very high achieving. Ever since I was a small child, I did a lot of things, and then I ended up being class president and drum major of the marching band, and I mean all these different leadership positions, and I really felt like I just had a lot of life figured out. And so I got into my 30s, and I was about 10 years into my marriage, and also had 2 young children at the time, when I realized that I didn't have everything together. And it really started the morning of April 8th, 2019. I woke up, and it was strange because I knew something was different. I felt different. And I remember it was a really beautiful morning, much like today is really beautiful, where the sun was just coming in, and I normally would wake up with a lot of anxiousness, which I thought was normal for people, just to have those running thoughts, that running dialogue constantly. I just thought that's what everybody sort of felt all the time. So I was used to waking up in the morning and having those thoughts go right away. What do I need to do? I've got to get the boys' lunches packed. I got to do this. I got to do this. And that morning I woke up and there was nothing. It was like my body, my mind, everything was very quiet. And I just was lying in bed thinking, today is going to be a really great day. And I went into work, and a few hours later, my husband called me, and he said, "Can I stop in to see you?" And I thought, I said, "Yeah." And I'm thinking, he's in between schools. He's a teacher, and so he was traveling between different buildings. And I thought he was just missing me and wanted to see me. So I was like, "Yeah, that'd be great." And I just felt I was in such a great mood, And I said, "Oh, I'm just getting so much done," and I was just on a roll. And so he came into my office, and I knew pretty quickly that something was wrong. And my first thought was somebody had died. So I was just like, what's wrong? What's going on? And my husband said, "I wanted us to be together when you saw this." And it was at that point that I noticed he was clutching his phone to his chest. And so I just didn't even know. I felt so out of place, like what is even going on? And so he turned the phone around, and he tapped it, and he turned it to face me. And it was like the whole world stopped. I'd never felt anything like this, but it was like I left my body, like my insides were sucked out of me and spit back in this random order, where it just didn't feel the same anymore. And so I'm looking at this, what's in front of me, which is this mugshot of my high school band director. And when my senses leave me, when they come back, it was weird because it was like I wasn't even thinking about that picture anymore. It was like I shut that out, and all I was worried about was comforting my husband at that time. And just I kept telling him, "It's okay, like everything's fine. This doesn't even affect us. It's not even, we're okay, we're fine." And he said, "You really need to read the article." And so I sat down and started reading, and I realized whatever I thought I was looking at, or whatever my brain had concocted for something that made sense to me, it was way outside of that. And so this man had been arrested for child sexual abuse and pornography. And it was reading this article that then I could feel myself start to unravel. And I started convulsing and just crying uncontrollably. And I knew in that moment that whatever life I had been living, whoever I was over. And I just knew, because I was like, I do not feel like the same person anymore. Something has happened to me. And so the reason that this had affected me so deeply is this man who was arrested, who I had not even really thought about in a decade. I had a relationship with when I was younger. So I use that word loosely, but whether it's a negative or positive, any kind, we are all in relationships with each other, right? And I quickly realized that I had information that the state police wanted, which had never occurred to me before, because I was not even aware that I had something terrible had happened to me. And that is because this man had groomed and sexually abused me for many years when I was younger. When I found out about this, I didn't even know what those words were. Groomed was not a word that I was familiar with. I thought I understood what rape was, what sexual assault looked like. It looked nothing in my mind like what this relationship had looked like. And so I had preserved it in my mind as being this one thing. And so on that day, that sort of shattered my whole reality. And I didn't really understand what was happening to me, why I felt, why I didn't feel like myself anymore. And on that day, while I was sitting across the table from my husband, and I was just coming down off of this complete physical, mental, emotional meltdown, my husband said to me, I think you really should think about seeing a therapist. And that was also really strange for me too, because I had never thought about seeing a therapist. That's not something that was in my world. I grew up thinking that therapists were for people that had suffered these really traumatic events, the car accidents, cancer, divorce, that there were these certain things that had to have happened to you that sort of qualified you to see a therapist. And so, but I knew when he said it right away that he was right. I could tell that whatever it was I was experiencing was bigger than I was. And I had always felt my whole life like I could handle whatever was coming at me. And this was the first time in my life that I said to myself, I don't know how to handle this. I've never felt this way. I don't know what this is. And so I agreed to go to therapy. And so that really began the start of my mental health journey, because it was really the start of me understanding that I was in need of a mental health professional. I was in need of exploring what was going on with my mental health, because when you live with who you are your whole life, you think that's normal. You come to think it's normal, and you don't understand that what you're experiencing may not be may not fit in this. You are, this is a mentally healthy, sound person. Here's the things that these people are dealing with. And I just, also because I was so successful, it sort of, I think, covered all that up, as I thought, well, how could you be so successful and have mental health issues? There's a lot to this story, but I did start seeing a therapist, and immediately it felt like this huge relief to be in the room with someone who I felt like I could say anything to them and there would be no judgment whatsoever. And, again, I talked about grooming and things like that, but trauma, not a word. I mean, even though it's all over, it's all around us, I just didn't think that it applied to me. And I did not understand how trauma affects people. And I didn't understand how little control people have over that. And that when these things happen to them, whether in their childhood or as an adult, that it's not their fault when they incur trauma, that it's not a choice that they're making. It's something that happens to them. So even though it's not their fault, it then becomes their responsibility to figure out how to deal with it. or navigating mental health challenges is that you still have to live while you're doing that. So while I was going to therapy every week, while I was reading books and online resources and trying to get my hands on anything that would explain what I was experiencing, I was also going to work and being a mom and being a wife, trying to keep up with the house, and it was very overwhelming. So I don't want to pretend that that in any way is easy. The beliefs I had held on to my whole life had to be challenged in a brand new way, because I had believed this relationship was a certain thing. I had believed it was genuine. I couldn't even wrap my head around the fact that I was a victim of abuse, that this person who I had revered and trusted and loved had been lying to me and using me. And so when our reality is challenged in that way, it really can destroy you in many ways. And so it's not just that challenges you. It's like your whole reality stops making sense. At least that's what it did for me. It wasn't just my belief about that one thing. It's when this happened, my belief about everything, about who I am, about how I've been seeing the world. Where did I go wrong in this? And how could someone fool me like this? So there was a point where I was already in crisis starting on that day, on April 8th, 2019. That was the beginning of the crisis. And the crisis did escalate even while I was working through these things, which I needed to. Looking back, I know that if I hadn't have done that, I would not be sitting here today. I know that for a fact. So the path may be messy, but that is normal for a lot of people. And the more complicated, the more complex the trauma, the messier it can become on that path. So ultimately, it got to the point where I had to, I knew that I had to take some really dramatic steps to keep myself safe, to prevent self-destruction, and because I was headed down a path where my whole life was going to be destroyed. And so I had to decide, am I going to choose, what is my choice here? Am I going to hide and hope it goes away? Or am I going to try to fix myself in the shadows? And I knew deep down what I needed to do was to share my story. I needed to write it, and I needed to be able to take the pain that I had experienced and turn it into purpose. And so that really was what saved me in the end, was deciding that I was going to face my trauma head on. And the more that I understood it, the more that I was willing to face it and to learn about it, the more I understood that what I was experiencing, which felt so foreign and no one will ever understand this, that the more resources I was able to find and the more people I was able to connect with, the more I understood that what I was experiencing was actually very normal for a person who had been through what I had been through. But they don't need to in order for me to feel validation in what it is I'm experiencing. Because I have chosen to face this trauma and to face myself with honesty and compassion. And it's what I would want for anyone else, is for people to know that you don't have to be afraid of yourself, that there's nothing that you've done in your life that makes you not worthy of love. And so I am going forward in my life with my truth and trusting myself, even if someone doesn't understand, even people that love me, that I know have the best intentions. It's okay for them not to understand and not to agree with the path that I take or the choices that I'm making. And I can still hold all of those things with love and understanding, because in order to heal from something like this that is so complex, you have to be able to trust yourself. And the only way for other people to be able to understand these very complex traumatic things that happen and how they affect us as human beings is to talk about these things. It is the only way for people to begin to understand something that is so complicated. And so I feel very confident in the purpose that I have in sharing my story. And I know that the more that I share it, the more confident I become, the more I'm able to process what happened to me, and the more I'm able to heal.